Burn This Book, a Banned Books book club where we, Nicolle and Eden, read a banned or challenged book twice a month and discuss its meaning, impact, and censorship to make it more accessible for all readers. This week's book is Lord of the Flies by William Golding, which was published in 1954. Also, we have a guest today, and it is Micah Clemence. He was on our show previously when we talked about The Giver. So let us welcome Micah.
Hi.
Did I say your last name right? Or did I do a weird, Foo Fighters kind of thing? You know what I mean? Like the Christopher Walken.
Wait, I don't know this Foo Fighters thing.
You know, Christopher Walken, when he introduced Foo Fighters, like this internet joke, he was like, and now Foo Fighters. and maybe I'm also doing that wrong, but I feel like I did the accent weird on your last name.
I mean, it feels like impossible to say Foo Fighters any other way now. That feels like more accurate. I can't remember if you said it right. It's just Clemence. That's it.
Okay, perfect.
It's nothing crazy. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Burn This Book super fan returning. I'm back. Boom.
Yes.
So,
boom, boom.
Why did he want
to us? Yeah.
Go ahead.
He reached out to us and he said, I want to talk about Lord of the Flies. What about it?
What about it? Oh,
yeah,
man,
what about it made you want to be like, oh, I want to be a guest for this book?
You were aggressive about it, Micah. Just
I was really forceful. Yeah.
So many emails. So many lines of communication.
My experience with this book was we read it in 10th grade, and I was so bad at reading books for school. I must have done less than half of the assigned reading in high school. Which is weird because I'm also the person that English class was made for. I like all of the discussions. And this is the book that taught me that because I read the book. And then when my teacher was like, see, this is symbolism. I was just like, heck yeah, it's symbolism. I'm all about this. I just remember having a blast reading it. And I remember finishing it and being like, this is, that was so, visceral and immediate, and I felt so I was really bowled over by the book, much as one character gets bowled over by a large boulder, and I was and as I was reading it, I really loved it, and then I ended up using that. I took AP classes in high school, not to brag, but I took AP Lang and AP Lit, and you're supposed to read books in that in those classes respectively to teach you to be okay, use this on one of the essays. And then I didn't use any of the books that we were assigned. I just used Lord of the Flies for both of the essays that I ended up having to write for those classes. And I did. I just used Lord of the Flies both times. I was like, yeah, I know how to talk about that book. So anyway, I was just really into it as a kid. So yeah,
that's cool. That's interesting. I personally didn't like this book when I read it first in high school. It was I think it was my freshman year that we read it, and I remember just being like, "This is so dumb." And I was so mad. Also, I'm trying not to use that word either. I'm using so much ableist language. This is so frustrating and disappointing. Yeah. And I was like, can we just keep doing these Lost Boys books, humanity? Let's just keep going. And I was really disappointed. And then my younger sister really loved it. And so that kind of gave me a different perspective. And this last read really changed my mind. I thought it was brilliant. Yeah. I really, really liked it. I thought it was really interesting and really smart. And I feel like I barely scratched the surface of understanding everything that William Golding was trying to say. I don't know, Eden, what was your experience?
I actually remember you not liking it, Nicolle, because that was one of our first conversations when we met each other freshman year of college.
Yeah, it's a big part of my personality was not
yeah, it was. I think it was. Because I remember talking about it and really loving. I came to the table really loving Lord of the Flies, and I still do. I think Simon was my favorite character throughout high school. It was oh, I love Simon. Simon's great. I wish I was like Simon, except for the dead part.
Yeah.
God. Spoiler alert.
Such a good point. An important clarification. That's really true.
And then and I still loved it this time. This time I listened to the audiobook that William Golding narrated himself.
No.
Yeah.
That was an option?
That
revealing
was an option.
Revealing that he can read as well as write, which is so cool.
That's double threat. That's all I gotta say. Can I give some little background that I didn't know about this?
Yes.
That was really cool. So this book was written almost as a satire of a very popular children's book at that time. Maybe you guys already knew this. The book was called The Coral Island, and it was a tale of the Pacific Ocean. And it was a Scottish book by author R.M. Ballantyne, and it just talks about these three boys who are marooned on an island in the South Pacific, and it has a lot of like imperialism. Christianity creates civility kind of energy, and they just have these really beautiful adventures, and it's in the genre, which I didn't even know this was a genre. It's called Robinsonade.
Yeah, to mean like Robinson Crusoe.
Yeah, so there's a whole genre of people being marooned and just the adventures that come on it. And William Golding read that book and he was like, this is stupid. Gosh, Nicolle, stop with these words. This is unrealistic is what his whole stance was. He told his wife, he was like, I want to write a book about children, what would happen if children were actually children. And they were all marooned in this space. And so it's more dystopian, and it is a play on the Coral Island, which I now want to read the Coral Island and compare, because a lot of his characters he even steals from the Coral Island and kind of remakes them, which is really, really interesting. And it was also his first book. And he's deemed as, he's written like, I think more than 15 works of fiction. That's very cool. He's deemed as one of the greatest British authors of all time and one of the most important fiction writers from like 1900 to 2005. There was like weird, obscure lists that they were like really tearing people into. But that was really interesting. Yeah. And he took away the imperialism and the Christianity bits and was just like, what would actually society would do? So he must have a little bit of a darker read on society than Ballantyne, which is interesting.
That makes sense. Something that I don't think I picked up on the first time that I took notes. I was writing notes down because I like to do that. And one of the I was picking up more political messaging this time than I did when I was surprise than when I read it and I was 15 or whatever. So there is like interesting things where in like in one of the chapters, in chapter 2, Jack says, we're not savages, we're English, and the English are best at everything. And then later that same character paints his face with the colors of the British flag, is not happy with the colors, washes them off, and then paints his face with the colors of the Nazi flag. And then he's like, I'm awesome now. And like, that's like the face paint that he has like from the rest of the book. So anyway, I don't know, like there's stuff I was just like paying attention to it because I'm like, I don't know, it seems like there's a lot of intentionality going into in a way that is, the book moves so well and is so breezy that you don't need to grasp all of this to have a good time and to like appreciate the book for what it is. But I think William Golding was doing a lot of really interesting things.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Can we do a summary?
Let's do a summary. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Holy cow. Who wants to do the summary?
I'll do a really quick one. And if you guys want to fill in. So supposedly there's this disaster. We don't really know what it is, but I learned. We'll talk about it later.
Right.
There's a disaster, and the only people that survive are these boys, and they are marooned on an island, which you could have gathered from what we talked about earlier. And immediately they set up like a system, and there's each character kind of has a different role. And they set up a system where they're like, we need to survive, we need to have a smoke signal up, and there was like another one. I don't remember the third rule.
We need to eat.
Yeah, we need to eat. And so they have these rules, and it's going great. And then chaos kind of ensues as different people take on leadership roles and start to become anarchic. I don't know. And they just start infighting, and children die, and they create like an evil beast that they're all afraid of, and it unites some of the children against others, and that beast is the Lord of the Flies. And the people become their most base selves, the people, the boys, and they're prepubescent, it seems like they're tweens and younger. And they become their most base selves, and then they end up getting rescued at the end, and even the rescuer, like, there's like shame there at seeing what these boys have become, kind of thing. And that's like the story. So for me, I was like, but there's a lot of really important details, but we'll get into them as we talk more, I'm sure.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
One of the things that struck me this time around too was I kind of think that this is a book that is a tragedy of manners, and that there's so many instances where William Golding he's not satisfied with just being like, yeah, they just started slowly becoming evil. He like details the specific instances in which characters slip, or conversations in which, like, for a little while, and it's strange to think about this at the end of the book, where things go, which I really want to talk about at the end of the book because I like love it so much. But but Jack and Ralph start as friends. Like, they are, like, at the beginning, like, they, like, it's clear that they really admire each other, and like they're hanging out, and like it's interesting that the idea, it's almost presented to the reader as though, like, well, the gang of main characters is going to be Jack, Ralph, Jack, and Simon, and then like the main characters shift because like Jack becomes more and more wild, and I'll say it, evil, and and Piggy becomes like one of the main characters at that point, essentially like shifting his like into, I don't know, it's interesting. The book is very interested in detailing how relationships shift. And like seeing the actual instance of Jack's breaking off of his relationship with Ralph is because Ralph won't apologize to Jack for like embarrassing him in front of everybody because of the fire. And I don't know, I'm really, really interested by that. That's like, I don't, it's a surprisingly sophisticated, it's a very sophisticated novel for a novel in which like kids end up murdering each other like on a beach and stuff.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I thought it was a very great mirror of society, obviously, but in that relationship between Jack, Ralph, and Piggy, like typically like a good leader doesn't actually know what he's doing. He usually has someone next to him who's like, hey, we should actually do this or that. And that was Piggy. And so like losing Piggy throughout the in the book, Ralph kind of like loses his way as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he suddenly doesn't have any of his strategic mind, like, because he was able to, I mean, he's just like a better speaker than any of the other people on the island. And it turns out that ends up being like he has poise, and that is something that we as humans care a lot about. But it is a tragedy because like you is especially, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but
You're not, Micah. I'm enjoying every word.
I'm really sensitive. This happens. I don't know why I'm like this, but in every single piece of media, when there is somebody who is overweight and gets picked on for being overweight, it like breaks my heart. And it wasn't, I've been that way for a while, but it's like I've only gotten more sensitive to it as time has gone on. And, it feels to me like in some ways the earliest chapters are the hardest to read because of that, because it like they become more violent and things get scarier, like more overt, but the very beginning of the island feels to me like it could have been like, this could be documentary footage of these kids like on an island. And I'm like, and so it kind of, it breaks your heart to see the protagonist like betray. I mean, he's called Piggy the rest of the book because he tells everybody that's what his name is. And it's like, we never find out what Piggy's name is.
We don't.
Yeah. So anyway.
He does also seem like the morality, like he represents a sense of morality to me. And when he dies, it's like, oh, there is no hope for these kids. And it's at that point, like, there's already a lot of that, like, heartbreak throughout. But the second Piggy dies, it's like, oh, it's over. There's no chance. That's how it felt to me. And the other thing that, like, I really thought about a lot is just that idea about fear and how important fear was as a character. To the point where the embodied fear within, like, what was the head? The pig's
head? The pig head, yeah.
The pig head on a stick, and there's flies all over it. It's very Beelzebub energy, like very satanic kind of vibes. And that represents the beast or the, of what they're fearing and what they're also worshiping and giving sacrifice to in order to keep calm. And it's like over the last 5 years, we've seen, longer than that, the last 10 years, we've seen the impact of fear. I think, and how big of a driver it is for people to let go of rationality and move forward. Eden and I just recorded a podcast about the satanic panic and how fear put a lot of people in jail without any evidence and in prison. And they there are real life consequences to choosing fear over the goodness of humanity. And I just feel like this is so interesting how, fear was the tool that motivated all these kids to unite against other kids and kill them. And it's just like, and it makes me it's just such a powerful drug, and I really underestimate it. But
right. I mean, it's interesting to see how like this like they start talking about the beast being like, okay, we've seen the island. There's just no way that something else lives on this island that's not pigs. Like it would be crazy if there was. But immediately, like very quickly, like Jack turns the messaging to like, I'll hunt the beast, and like by giving credence to somebody's fears, they feel like they are being listened to, even though they're actually being taken advantage of. Like it's not like it's this fear is being immediately like twisted and weaponized. And you were just mentioning that, but like we can see that happen all the time on like news cycles or social media. Like it's really nuts. So yeah.
And with the Nazi thing that you're bringing up, that was like one of the biggest tools and best tools to drive the Holocaust. And we see that today with the fear of different marginalized populations in the U.S. and other places where, fear is just weaponized to unite a group of people. And I just think as human beings, if we're going to be literate and fair and just in our judgments on our political system and our politicians, we need to be very aware of, does this person make me feel fear? Does this person incite fear? Does this person say that they will solve my fear? Is this person using fear, whether it's real or fabricated? Are they using fear to win my trust? And I think that is a very simple question that we can use when we're going to the polls. Because if they are, there is something wrong.
For 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's the difference between being able to be reactionary or proactive, right? So, like, I mean, if it's more complicated by like mentally, it's more complex to be proactive as opposed to be reactive. But it also, like, you look at the happiest people in the world and they're like, oh, like they're making decisions about things that they want to do and then pursuing those goals, as opposed to being like, I need to watch out for bad people that are going to hurt me. It's like, if that's the main thing that's driving you, as it drives our characters further and further into the novel. So
further and further in there, those pages.
And very on topic of our podcast, like books inciting or parents pointing to books as objects of fear.
Truth.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And oh yeah,
I
go for it.
was just that I was diligent and I did not look up the reason why it was banned, but I can think of a few. So yeah.
I have a question for both of you, as you are both lovers of this novel. Why, like when you first read it, Micah kind of touched on it, but was there a specific part of the book, or like what about it stuck with you to the point where you were like, where Eden, it did bother you, or you were aware and you remembered that I don't like it? Like,
Yeah.
you know?
Mhm.
And Micah, what about it was like, wow, this covers everything? I'm just curious if you guys could both go into more of that, because I just didn't experience any of that my first read.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Eden, go ahead.
For me, so it was on Simon. I think Simon being it's odd because like I think he gave me a lot of feeling of hope that there is good, like pure goodness in the world, even though like they end up killing him out of fear. But it's just like it was like a moment of like aspiring to be a Simon in my life or something like that, of wanting to emanate goodness, wanting to recognize the fear and the fear that drives people, and like I think recognizing the fear that drives people also makes you more empathetic to them. So referring back to that episode that we were recording about the Satanic Panic, and Dungeons and Dragons, that was the connection to a book.
Sweet.
Yeah.
If you haven't listened to it, listen back. I don't know which one of these will be released first. Probably this one.
We'll
So
see.
just prep for it.
Prep for our D&D episode.
Awesome.
But essentially, like we couldn't fault the parents to for being afraid of D&D, right? Because like taking the environment that they were growing up, that they were parenting in, like daycares were relatively new. They're coming from serial killer era,
Right?
Yeah,
and cults. And then this and then this unknown thing that their kids are suddenly into. It's like, oh, what the heck is this?
Yeah.
So you couldn't really fault them, but I think where we are falling apart is like the lack of communication of like with banned books, with Simon coming down the mountain trying to be like, hey, actually the beast isn't real. It's a guy who was parachuted down and died.
Right.
But instead of like listening to Simon as a voice of goodness, and like desire to bridge a misunderstanding, out of fear, the boys just killed him. So I think Simon, a lot of my love for this book hinges on Simon.
That's
which is
really interesting. I love that. And it checks out for you. And I also like that angle that it says aspirational also. Like you didn't identify with Jack.
No.
Yeah.
I was like, head of the choir boy leader? Okay.
He can hit a high C.
Yeah.
He can hit a high C.
He can hit a high C. That makes him a leader.
Yeah. Micah, about you.
Yeah. I mean, I thought at the time, I really did jive with, I don't know, like my teacher at the time, Mr. Rhodes, was doing a good job talking about like how the book is working on multiple levels of symbolism. And I got into the idea of the book as like a piece of art. But I think the thing that really drew me in was just, and I really love thriller and horror material today, and I feel like Lord of the Flies is incredible thriller material in that it lays out the groundwork. And the thing that I think sets a thriller apart from other, like I say, a fantasy story, is that often other stories will continually expand in their scope, and thrillers at a certain point start to constrict their scope and start the objectives of characters start to become more and more simple. And that's scary because you're like, actually, maybe I need to compromise my goals because and so at first it's like, we need to get rescued and all of us can get rescued. And then it's like, actually, maybe we just need to like try and not murder each other. And then it's like, maybe, okay, well, Simon's dead. Now, spoiler alert to people who are reading Burn This, or
all
read
they
Lord
do
of,
is spoiler alerts.
okay. Simon's dead. Okay, I guess we just got to keep the remaining 4 kids that are not part of Jack's tribe alive, and then two of them get taken, and that's very scary in its own way. And then when Piggy dies, like that's when to me I realized I'm like, this is like not. I didn't like that Piggy died because it's very tragic and all. And I was writing some notes about that, but when Ralph is by himself and hiding in the forest and running towards the beach and the island is on fire, like that is like the stakes have been raised and simplified. Like he's just like, actually, it's just about you. You have to go. You're going to die. Run. And and that's on an enjoyment level of thriller material. Like that is dynamite. Like that's just incredible. And I so like that's not maybe that's not sophisticated, but I remember reading it as a 15-year-old and I was like, this rules. So like and I feel like a lot of the complaints about books that you read in high school is like, this is boring, and I'm like, I can't see an argument. Somebody can argue that it's too grim, but I don't think somebody could argue Lord of the Flies is boring.
No,
like that would be a tough. I think that would be a tough one to sell. So yeah.
It's got everything. Choir boys.
It's got choir boys. They show up in their choir uniforms, and they're like, one of them. I think Simon passes out like immediately. Yeah. It's like, dude, we should take this off. Simon's a real one for that. He's just like, we really shouldn't be wearing choir uniforms on a tropical island or probably elsewhere.
I love that. Thank you both for answering my question.
For sure.
I have another interesting thought. The original manuscript of this book was detailed a really intense nuclear disaster where all of society was like destroyed except for these boys. And it went through a series of edits, and people were like, this is so ridiculous. We can't deal with this. Like, the whole nuclear bomb thing is ridiculous. All of this is ridiculous. And so William Golding had to go through tons and tons of edits. And I just think that's interesting because he did have it. To me, that has like more of a Kurt Vonnegut energy. I don't know.
Sure.
Whenever I think of like atomic, anything.
Sure.
Post World War II science, I am always like, that's very Kurt Vonnegut to me. But I wonder if that would have changed our read on the book if we had had more of that chunk in there, or if it would have kept the read the same.
We do get a little bit. Some of it is there because Piggy's like, didn't you hear there was an atom bomb? Yeah. And so we do have, and it's one of the things that makes the book so interesting and work. So I don't know. It's it's a tight balance. Is that Piggy is sort of the most mentally there of like the kids in terms of like being able to like remember stuff. And so it is interesting that like Ralph is disturbed by him saying that and being like, considers for a second that his dad maybe is dead. And then he's like, I can't think about that. And then like Ralph just like stops thinking about it. And that feels like accurate to the fact like, I mean, it is a story about, I mean, there are lots of children who are good at shelving something in their mind and being like, that's too hard. Can't do that.
That's a real thing.
Oh, no, for sure. I'm like, I grew up with the opposite problem where like, if somebody were to say that, I'd be like, well, now I'm not going to be able to think about anything else. Which I don't think that's healthy for kids either. So like, I don't want kids to be like me, but it is, I love all of the adult, I love, so at the end of chapter 5 is when Ralph is talking to the new cast of the protagonists, because it's like, okay, Jack is definitely not one of the protagonists, and Ralph refers to Piggy, and Simon as 3 blind mice, which is cute and sad. And he writes, or the chapter ends with him being like, I wish they could send us a sign like that people outside could communicate with us. And that's when the man in the parachute who's dead shows up. And it feels like William Golding being like, adults don't have this figured out. Here's what they've got figured out. They're killing each other out there on just a more organized scale than you guys have figured out. Yeah. And it's, I mean, and they're, a spoiler alert again to people who are listening to this. The end of the book is, the end of the book is Titanic. It's so good. It's like they are burning down the whole island, which has been foreshadowed, or like in chapter 2, because they accidentally start a way bigger fire than they were starting to. And something that I did not remember at all from when I first read it was that's the first casualty in the book is the one kid with the birthmark on his head disappears, and we are left to assume he probably just got lost in that fire. And like early in the book. And anyway, so like when we get to the end of the book and they're chasing Ralph, the island is on fire, and it is because that island is on fire that a warship notices them and comes to pick them up. And there is this sad irony where you're like, okay, you guys are going to beds, but like you guys are being picked up in the middle of I always, when I read it, assumed that World War III was happening while they were on this island.
Yeah, the original manuscript said it was the middle of a nuclear war.
Right.
And it was very detailed. There was supposed to be like a whole half of the book was supposed to be the war.
Whoa.
Yeah, and it was all taken out. Yeah.
Dang. I mean, it would be interesting. I imagine it probably is better the way it is, but that is it's cool. It's cool that he knew that. I like that. Anyway, I don't know. I love those allusions to like every. It feels like that is the kind of stuff that stops it from being. If somebody could read Lord of the Flies and be like, kids are messed up, and I feel like William Golding is trying to say that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is like, this is us. We're on this island, and like just to remind you that adults haven't got it figured out. Like here, like every sign that they get from the outside is like, just
adults are doing the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, to be bleak.
Sure.
Look at the state of the world today, you know.
Sure.
Yeah. But there still are Simons out there.
There are still Simons out there trying to bridge the gap of understanding.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I know that some people had, well, I don't know. I think that some people might have had issues with the book because it is only about boys. So that is my guess at it. But in my copy of the audiobook, William Golding said, I didn't write about girls because I didn't grow up a girl. So I don't know how girls work. And I know how boys work. And he just like very bluntly was like, yeah, I know boys can be like this. Like boys will pick up a name like Piggy and then just incessantly call a kid Piggy. Yeah. Or like more boys recognize each other's status. So like Jack and Ralph's initial attraction to each other is like, oh, I see you. You're a strong, attractive boy like me too. And you're a leader. And I'm a leader too. And so that is why William Golding wrote it as boys. But yeah. And interesting. For me, on another level, it's like, well, maybe if girls ruled the world, we wouldn't.
We wouldn't kill a bunch of people.
We wouldn't be in the state that the world is in right now, rather than like, just a bunch of boys running around and being like, but the meat. We need meat. Like,
that is true. It does feel like everybody is talking about like, but I gave you meat, and it's like, wow, that's actually not that important right now. There's lots of it's so funny that fruit has been available like all the time on the island. He's like, yeah, but I mean, fruit
meat
sucks.
Yeah.
Like that's like they don't need me. They're doing fine. Yeah, it's just funny. Yeah, I had a question. I don't have any children, but Eden, you have a kid, and I was just wondering, since this is read through, you do have a kid, did that change your impressions of the book at all?
Funnily enough, the only thing I'm thinking about when I was reading the book that was related to kids,
Right.
because I'm expecting a boy, is whether or not any of these names I could use.
Awesome. That's great. I love that.
So I'm just like, Ralph. Ralph's a good character. Ralph's a good name.
Ralph's a good
Man, I wish I knew Piggy's name, because then maybe we could do Piggy's name.
We could do Piggy's name,
So that was
I love
the
that.
only way I read it
that.
as a parent.
No, it's great. I was reading it, and like my nephew is named Jack, and I was just like, he can't read this. That's too. He'll get too much inspiration. So,
Micah, will you share more of your notes and your thoughts?
I will.
You can just kind of free verse this experience.
Sure. I wrote down some. Some of them are just like phrases that I think William Golding is such a talented writer, and so like I would like sometimes read his prose and be like, this is just so lovely. He describes Jack as his face was crumpled and freckled and ugly without silliness. Is just like so like he's like making sure that you're like, he wasn't making a silly face, he just looks like that.
Yeah.
Which is like pretty
There's
brutal.
Nothing endearing about that.
This guy is not. He does not look cool. Let's see more notes. The pause was only long enough for them to understand what an enormity the downward stroke would be. That's a quote from when Jack is about to trying to kill the pig the first time. There's in chapter 3, I love this detail. Jack had to think for a moment before he could remember what rescue was. He is told by Ralph, he's like, what about rescue? And Jack's like, there could be rescue, but he'd even forgotten that early in the book about the possibility of what rescue was going.
He's so lost in it.
Yeah,
lost in
he becomes
game kind of thing he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the kids, something I loved about the book is, and I wouldn't have remembered it, is that Golding acts as an omniscient narrator, which is not the style today at all. But Golding feels very comfortable moving from character to character and describing what they're doing, even if they're alone on the island. So Golding is allowed to see whatever he wants the reader to see. And there's a part in chapter 4 where there's the really scary guy Roger is following this kid, one of the youngins, who is playing around with these little fish in these small puddles. And there's this quote from talking about the kid playing with the fish, and he says, he became absorbed beyond mere happiness as he felt himself exercising control over living things. It's, I know there's a lot of bleak observations about the ways that kids act, but it just also is just, written in a way that feels very wise.
I love these quotes you're pulling. They're so good. I'm really enjoying this.
I love them. There's in chapter 5, there's a scene where it's one of the conferences, and they're not called conferences, assemblies that they have. It's one of the assemblies that they're having, and Piggy comes up with something. He's like, the only thing that there is to be scared of is ourselves. We could be a bad thing. And then later in the same thing, Simon says the same thing, and everybody is now listening to Simon. And Piggy is Piggy cries out because he's like, I can't, he doesn't say this, but as the reader, you're like, Piggy did just say that. And it is, I felt deep empathy for Piggy in that moment. In chapter 6, when we first go to the rock fort that they call a castle, that's jutting out the side of the island. It describes the flat rock down in the water that sometimes is enveloped in water and sometimes isn't, depending on the tide. It describes it as a table, and that's the rock that Piggy dies on. And it's just it makes it feel more like Piggy is a sacrifice when he
like
dies.
An altar
like he's like this is like an altar that Piggy dies on for the island. And then this will be the last thing. There's a thing I have it up on my. This isn't the last thing of the podcast. I'm just the last. I'll stop doing whatever this is.
I'm loving.
But there's this interaction that really struck me in chapter 7. Ralph is they're hunting the beast, and they haven't yet. Simon doesn't yet know that it's the parachute man, but they're walking, and Ralph is becoming more and more existential and realizing he's like, maybe we're never getting off this island. I don't know how to keep these people together. And he's like, has a lot of worry. And Simon says to him, you'll get back to where you came from. And this is just, I was thinking about this also, Eden, because you were bringing up how Simon is kind of the center of the book for you, and that makes a lot of sense to me because like he does represent this generosity and goodness that so many of the other boys do not have inherently. And it says Simon nodded as he spoke. He was kneeling on one knee. I'm skipping ahead a little bit. Ralph was puzzled and searched Simon's face for a clue. It's so big. I mean, he's talking about the ocean. Simon nodded. All the same, you'll get back all right. I think so anyway. Some of the strain had gone from Ralph's body. He glanced at the sea and then smiled bitterly at Simon. Got a ship in your pocket? Simon grinned and shook his head. How do you know then? When Simon was still silent, Ralph said curtly, you're batty. Simon shook his head violently till the coarse hair flew backward and forward across his face. No, I'm not. I just think you'll get back all right. For a moment, nothing more was said, and then they suddenly smiled at each other. There's this... I just kept on noticing how often Ralph and the other boys they deflect any sincerity or any, like, sentimentality, and it feels like William Golding is like, this is gonna kill us. Like, if we can't look at each other in the eye and just be like, I think a good thing could happen to you, and I want that, and not like joke about it, like we've got to be able to do that like every once in a while, or else we're gonna die as a nation and as a world. Like and like Simon is like does represent like the cure there, and I like seeing that Ralph struggles with that, but that like I don't know, I felt as the reader I was like, oh, I hope he learns this. So yeah,
it's interesting because in the original copy also that going back to it, there was like a being kind of that would speak to Simon that was supposed to be God. Simon is supposed to be like the spiritual moral point of this group. And yeah, and when the being got edited out, let me tell you, like that's why he has all this like imaginary dialogue with the Lord of the Flies. The Lord of the Flies, but even before that, he would let me find this note. He would talk to God, and all the edits got so intense that William Golding eventually was just like, I don't even care. I can't even be objective about it. I don't even want to read it. Like, he was so upset about how much it was edited out, because people were very, there was a lot of opinions by all the editors. But where is it? Yeah, so there's like this figure that Simon interacts with, who is never identified but is implied to be God, and they had to remove that figure from the whole story, which also seems very British to me, TBH. So I don't know, but it is interesting, like you're saying, there is a spirituality and a sincerity there, and this knowingness that almost like he's a prophet, and when they're looking over the ocean, that gave me like a Moses vibe, like very biblical. And cool. Like, you will get out of this, but he doesn't have any like evidence, but he just knows. I have a game for you both.
I'm ready.
It's just one question, but but I'd like if Eden has something else to say. I don't want to. Okay. So there was an original title of the book, and people thought it was terrible. Do you know this already?
No,
okay,
I'm glad we're talking about this because I wanted to talk about the title, and so this is a great segue.
Okay, good. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to give you 3 options.
Okay.
Of what it is, and I want to hear what you guys think. All right. So my first option is A, Strangers from Within. Second option is Boys Will Be Boys. Third option is The Island of Boys.
Gonna guess if it's a bad one, I'm gonna guess it's gonna be one of either B or C. Is it B?
Boys Will Be Boys? No.
It's not B.
No.
Is it A?
Yes. The original title was Strangers from Within.
Lord of the Flies.
Which is like oddly heavy, oddly not. The critique was that it was like, she was like, it's too abstract. The editor, Miss Perkins, said it was too abstract and too explicit at the same time.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
I was like a writer and that was my editor's feedback. I'd be like, what?
Wow.
Yeah.
What? It's like, you're
what
too
am I
tight,
supposed to
but
do with that?
You're too tight, but you're also too loose. And
Yeah.
you're like, okay,
Too
gotcha.
clear, too blurry. I don't know. Yeah.
I love the title. I love titles. I think about titles all the time, and I love titles. Sometimes there was be some times where I would supposed to be doing homework in college, and I would just pull up an empty document, not do homework, and just write down what are cool titles that would make me interested in the thing if they were called this, and just write them down. Lord of the Flies is one of the best titles, and one of the reasons is it's immediately interesting because you hear Lord of the Flies, and you're like, okay, what's that about? And you're like, well, it's a bunch of boys, and they're being really mean to each other on an island, and you're like, okay. And it's one of the best titles in that it's my favorite kind of title in that you do not know initially what it is referring to, and it gains significance after you have finished the book. So when or watch the movie or whatever it is. So once you realize what Lord of the Flies is and that is what he chose to call it, you're like, whoa, that gives this book strange new significance and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I love it.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
At first, when you said you had a game for us, Nicolle, I thought it was going to be a singing game for Choir Club. It's just
oh, right. That was the obvious direction, Edith. You're so right. That was the obvious direction. I have a singing game for you both.
Uh-huh.
You really honed in on that choir boy detail.
I did. I did.
Took it far. That's so funny. Do we have guesses of why it was banned?
Yeah, I've got a few.
I think because kids were dying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty violent. But here's the thing. Actually, I'm going to hedge my bets on this one. And this is because I think still families are still more scared by sex than violence. And so I'm going to guess there's a lot of naked boys. And I think that they don't like that. I'm going to guess that bothered parents. I'm not sure. But.
Okay.
Yeah.
There could
for me, I think it's the murdering.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
But yeah.
I also wonder if there's something about allusions to indigenous life, and there's kind of a mockery of that the word savagery being used, and then they're kind of cosplaying indigenous traditions once they reach that quote unquote savage mindset. I don't like that word, but using it to describe.
Right. No, but they do. But they use that word in the book.
Yeah. So I wonder if that also could be part of it too.
Yeah.
Okay. Challenge in several locations.
Sure.
Let's see. Okay. This one's interesting. Challenged in South Dakota. Oh, no.
Okay.
Oh, this is just a timeline. Sorry. I'm orienting myself to what I'm looking
You're fine.
at. But in North Carolina, it was challenged because the book is, quote, demoralizing in as much as it implies that man is little more than an animal. Let's see. People were just pretty vague and said inappropriate reading assignment. In Texas in 1984, quote, because of excessive violence and bad language.
Did you say bloody in it? Yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
Oh, and when someone mentions, or Piggy has asthma, and the way they spell it out is asthma.
Asmar,
So there's
yeah.
ass in there. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Stop.
A committee of the Toronto, Canada. Oh, so this is Canada now.
Oh,
Interesting.
dude.
1988. They say that the novel is racist and recommended that it be removed from all schools.
My guess is because of Indigenous cosplay. I think that,
I think that, yeah. And then parents and members of the Black community complained about a reference to the N-word in the book.
Oh.
Where?
I don't remember that.
I missed that.
Well, that would be, yeah.
That's fair, yeah. Which I guess also tells you different perspectives reading things will catch different things. And I think that's an important thing for us all to have compassion for, you know?
For sure.
Let's see. In Iowa in 1992, it was challenged because of profanity, lurid passages about sex, which I don't remember, and statements defamatory to minorities, God, women, and the disabled.
The only, I mean, like, there's a part where Simon strokes Ralph's arm shyly. But that's the only thing I could, early in the novel, by the way. It was pretty, it's like really, really early on. And I was like, I don't know, dude. And maybe people in the 70s were just different. Or like boys in the 70s were just different. I wasn't like stroking a whole lot of people's arms, but I don't know. but that's probably an individual difference. That's just me. I'm the weird one.
Were there things taken out?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, did we read a copy of this book that other people have read? I'm going to check in these editions. No, it doesn't say.
I wonder if, so like, you were talking about a lot about the original manuscript, so I wonder if there were
But that was never published.
In between.
I wonder if some of this is implied stuff. I know there is a frightening implication that I haven't fully figured out what it is implying, but the characters Sam and Eric, the twins, they tell Ralph that Roger sharpened a stick at two ends, and they don't say anything more about it. But like that is supposed to imply something awful that was done to them that made them be like, I guess we're part of Jack's crew now.
Yeah.
And we never, that's never explained to us. And like Ralph is like, I'm too tired to understand what you're talking about, but which is for the best probably. But like it is, I don't know, maybe parents read that and they're like, I know exactly what it is. I'm a huge pervert.
Yeah,
I can't let that my kid read that.
No, maybe there was implications that I didn't understand or that I didn't interpret because I don't know the context for it. I don't know, but maybe there were just also wild implications, like a complete misreading of the book. I don't know.
Yeah,
and maybe I need to reread.
I think that it's I don't know. I have a burn this book question. I just have a question that like for you guys to reflect on, since you guys are the foremost experts on this podcast.
On this podcast,
you guys are.
Do we know anything? No. Do we read? Yes.
You know how to read.
Yeah.
What I mean to say is that do you feel like have you run into other books? How many like it feels like when parents are challenging a book or anybody is challenging a book, there is kind of a lot of conjecture, a lot of wild. Like this feels like par for the course that a parent is just like, yeah, and the part where like Satan had sex with somebody, and you're like, what? What part of the book is that? And like, it feels like parents are not as concerned with what is in the actual book than how scared they are of the book.
Yes.
So I guess my question is like, have you run into this before? Like, where you like, or like, was that in like the thing that I just read that the parents had problems with? What was that even in here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And I think in our very first episode, Nicolle brought like a statistic or something about how, like most of the bans that are happening, like a lot of them are unread by the people who are banning them.
Yeah.
So it is things taken out of context, usually used as the beasts that we're all trying to fight. And because no one else has a greater understanding, like a comprehensive understanding of what this quote is taken from.
Yeah.
And they just assume that this book is all this quote.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was an example of a poem that was banned, and the way that it was interpreted was that, and this was in the podcast "Things Fall Apart" by John Ronson.
Ronson.
Highly recommend. It's like
Sweet.
season 1.
The first episode, I think,
episode
is
1. I think
the title is Dirty Books.
Yeah, and he gives the example that there was this poem that was interpreted as like we should all just go out and sin, if we're using like a Judeo-Christian term, party, live frivolously, fornicate, all of those ideas, and the evangelical world kind of went up in arms. The poem's actual interpretation is these people all die. And it is like a direct thing of like, you can't do that. You can't live this way. You need to live with morality and all these other things that like that, although society is turning that way, will end up being the demise of society. So it's it actually is like speaking or preaching according to an evangelical perspective, but they read it in the complete opposite way. So there's like a lack of media literacy. I also think we get these like sound bites. There's a book right now that we'll talk about later that is being blown up, and it's a graphic novel, and they're just posting one page and kind of passing it out to people. Whoa. And they've talked about it on Fox News, and they're not giving any context for the rest of the book at all, and they're showing that this one page is like pornographic, and I have a lot of mixed feelings about it that we'll get into later, because I'm like, I do feel like books are getting a little too graphic for me right now. But it's interesting because they're just showing that one page.
Right.
Yeah.
No one's reading the full book. And so,
they're passing it out. That's kind of pornographic of them to just hand people a random page.
But I think that's the case when you're talking about fear. I think you just hone in on one tiny detail and blow it up. Because when we do know the context of most people are not afraid. Like, we shouldn't be afraid of most people. And most things are really not as scary as they seem once you know the full story. That's why literacy is really important.
Yeah.
So to answer your question.
And, and to be...
absolutely, yes.
I'm trying to be mindful of how I say this, but at work, we learned about literacy, or we're talking about accessibility in design. And how to make designs accessible. And a lot of accessible design comes from the words that we write, because like 60% of, I got to fact check that, because I feel like I throw around 60% specifically. But a majority of American adults have a literacy level of a reading level that, there's like a scale of it, but their reading level is at 4th grade.
Right.
And Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is maybe a touch tougher than 4th grade.
Right. Yeah.
And so if Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is a touch above 4th grade, then a lot of the books that are being banned and challenged are definitely way above that.
Right. That's a really good point. I'm going to quote Greg on this. Greg, mutual friend of Eden and Nicolle and I's, father of one of our children, I'm not going to say whose, he asked, do you think that art would be better if, like, do you think that art being better means less people like it? Like, is art's increasing quality mean that that it is by definition less accessible? I don't personally think that it's totally that. I'm also not blasting Greg's opinion where he can't defend it. Love you, Greg. but I think that's a really interesting thing to consider, in that I think lots of art is written or created with the idea in mind that I'm like, I think people are as smart as I am, and sometimes that might not be true, and like it might be received very differently. Yeah, I don't know. I think about that with a lot of satire, where like somebody writes a satire and they're like, I think people are going to get this, and people are like, Jonathan Swift, you want people to eat people? And he's like, no, the point is that you don't do that. But so I don't know.
Yeah, I think about this a lot too. I met with this guy in Denver who started the Folklore Center here. His name is Harry Tuff. It's like the second folklore center in America. It was a really big deal. He hung out with the coolest people. And this is the true thing. He like introduced Joan Baez to the Beatles. And he thought that Bob Dylan was a loser.
he was a little bit, but that's okay.
But his whole thing is that the reason why folk music is so important is because it communicates at the most, is because it creates community. And it communicates to every single person. And that is the purpose, that if art cannot help bring community and create community, then there's no value to it in his mind. That's why folk music, that's why he really tried to create like the Folklore Center to gather people, and why folk music is such a simple form of communication that everyone at the most base level can understand what this person's trying to say. And so I tend to lean on that person's perspective. I think that things that are community building are good. And I don't know what I mean by good, but I just mean that they are good. I don't have like a beautiful definition for that, but I wonder if that applies to paintings and I don't know where that fits in with books, but I do think like Toni Morrison, I always bring her up, but she's like her books are heavy. Yeah. But you can still understand the story, and the story in and of itself is so human that it builds compassion. And I think Lord of the Flies is tricky because it doesn't necessarily build compassion, but it feels relatable at the same place.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe it does build compassion. I don't know. But for me, it wasn't like a book where I was like, I feel like I want to understand everybody. It was more like, I feel aware of myself a lot more, which is equally important in my opinion.
Well, I do like, and I think that's a really good point. Okay, my thought is swirling of heads. Swirling. My thought is swirling of heads. I'm so sorry I said that. That's funny. Okay, what I mean to say is, one, when I said that I was smart earlier, I was pretending to be an artist who was making something. I don't actually think I'm smart. Right. So listeners, don't you dare think I'm smart. And don't think that I think I'm smart.
I think you're listening.
The second thing, I am not going to be able to be on, because you guys are going to get a better guest for this, but on the Beloved episode. But I just want to say, Beloved by Toni Morrison rules so hard, and I love that book. And people don't say, you were saying how like there is still a story that Toni Morrison is telling, and it's absolutely true. The thing that people won't say about Beloved, it's a ghost horror story. It's nobody leads with that, but I'm like, that's how you should sell it to people. It's so good.
Yeah, it's spooky town.
It's spooky.
It's really good. It's immensely satisfying, and is like, it is a masterpiece. The other thing, but about like art being accessible and building community, I love that. And I often think about art as communication, is like, how is somebody else, like, what does this mean to somebody who that is not me, or that is not the artist or whatever. And that's one of the reasons I think I like to forego, I don't really like to call things bad, because I think a lot of that is like based off of interpretation. I think one of the reasons why Lord of the Flies is great, like other great works, is that I think it is accessible on multiple levels. Like, I think that like somebody could approach Lord of the Flies, and if they didn't get anything out of it, they would be like, I feel like I was engaged the entire time. So like, I don't like that, like it wasn't. And then as soon as like you go just a little bit deeper, you're gonna be like, oh, I think I understand a little bit more. And then like, there's lots of, I think great works of art can be pulled apart and interpreted in very different ways. And yeah, and I think it achieves that, and also it is accessible on a surface level. Like I feel like it is. I feel like, this is weird to call it this, but I think it is accurately a crowd pleaser, in that it is like, oh, this is like, I don't know. It's a book that really crazy, interesting stuff happens on a physical level as well as an emotional and mental one. So, yeah,
I agree with that.
This ties in pretty well to William Golding's epilogue in the audiobook. Where basically he was just like, a lot of people ask me what this book is about. There's so many interpretations of the story, so I'm not going to choose between them. And he says, make your own choice. All of these interpretations contradict each other, the various choices. The only choice that really matters, the only interpretation of the story, if you want one, is your own. Not your teachers, not your professors, not mine, not a critic's, not some authorities. The only thing that matters is, first, the experience of being in the story, moving through it. Then, any interpretation you like. If it's yours, then that's the right one, because what's in a book is not what an author thought he put in it. It's what the reader gets out of it.
Oh, I love that. I think that's the thing. It should be able to stand on its own. It should have, and I think that's hard to do. It's kind of hard to do. I have a fact check for you about the stat. So, this was a Gallup poll from 2020, so it might not be the most accurate. I mean, the most recent, but this is the most recent I could find. About 130 million adults in the U.S. have low literacy skills. That means more than half of Americans between the ages of 16 and 74, that's 54% of Americans, read below the equivalent of a sixth grade level. So, and I would argue Lord of the Flies is, we all read it in high school, right? So I don't know what level the ALA deems it, but if 54% of Americans can't understand above a sixth grade level, it's highly stressful.
Not good, I would say.
Yeah. And I think that's why these type of things are important. And I would challenge our listeners or to help build literacy in your own communities, whether it's in your own family, in your own home, but start book clubs or just read with your kids. And if you're one of those people who reading is really hard, your literacy levels have been a big challenge, I would highly recommend just keep trying. Just keep reading. The best way to grow as a reader is just to keep reading. And even if you don't understand the content, it will start coming. And that is like the gift of reading. It is, your brain is so cool. So keep reading and keep trying, and
for sure,
don't give up on it, because it is worth it.
And and that's the gift of libraries and librarians too. And inside those libraries, there are computers. And here's a hot tip. Some of the books I didn't read in high school, I went straight to Spark Notes. Yeah. And a lot of these books have Spark Notes.
Yeah, so true.
So if you
dissect it for you and help you understand.
Yeah, while you read, go to Spark Notes. Use whatever tools help you understand, and you will improve so fast. I promise you that. Absolutely.
For sure.
Well, yeah. Go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say that, and I loved what William Golding said too, that your interpretation is just as valid as other people and people's interpretations. And I think a lot of the time, art in quotation marks, just meaning all media, is sometimes seen as an insider's club where I'm not smart enough to figure that out. And I'm like, well, just watch a movie and what did you get out of it? Just tell me, or read this book and what do you think this is about? Because what you think is relevant. And it's you're already in the club if you're sharing what you think. That's that's all it takes.
Yeah, it is a skill you can practice.
Yeah. Exactly. It's a skill you can practice. And on that point, I just I'm reading a textbook that I am not enjoying at all right now, but I'm still learning things from it. It's about neurobiology in the brain. That's what neuro is. I don't know why I said in the brain. Sorry. My point is that a cool thing is that we have in the last decade or so discovered, the last 2 decades, we've discovered that the adult brain is a lot more plastic than we thought it was, which is really good. So like
Ooh, awesome.
before we thought that like you had to get certain, like you learn a lot better as a kid than you do as an adult because of the way that your neurons work. And that is still true, but we have discovered that our adult brains do produce new neurons when before we thought that like you had all of the neurons that you were ever going to have like as a kid. Anyways, so that is just a little science corner here on Burn This Book to let you know that you can learn and grow still as an adult, however old you are. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's and also reach out to us if you're looking for resources and we'll respond.
Yeah.
Not that we know things, but we can do some research.
We'll do some research. But just another, going back to me mentioning SparkNotes, another plug for SparkNotes. I do think I was at a lower literacy level growing up in English as a second language household.
Mm-hmm.
I had a really interesting conversation with my older sister where she grew up mostly in Hong Kong in an English school. So she had the education to learn how to read things versus me. My mom was reading to us, not in Cantonese, but in English. And I think her literacy level affected our literacy because she couldn't describe what was happening in the books that she was reading to us. So a lot of my high school years, I remember talking to Greg a couple years ago. I was just like, I think I was stupid in middle school and high school because like a lot of times people would mention things and I'd be like, I don't understand. I understand now that's not stupidity. It's just like a lack of literacy that I had. And so SparkNotes saved my butt in AP Lang and AP Lit because I was like, I literally have no idea what the heck is going on in this book. And SparkNotes just laid it out pretty plainly. So I was like, okay, I understand. I can now write and say about this book.
But that's a really good point because a lot of the books we do read in our schools do have references that are biblical or from Western, white, Anglo, whatever perspective with a lot of different like allusions, so stuff like Beowulf and things that are not as commonly referenced in other cultures and communities. So yeah, that's a really good point that we didn't even reference. So yeah, SparkNotes is useful just for those things.
For sure.
I don't have anything else to say other than this was so wonderful, and I thought I'm so grateful that you ever want to be on this, Micah.
Oh man, I love being on Burn This Book. It's easy. This is great. I love this.
So grateful.
For sure.
Yeah, anytime.
Yeah, I'll look at more of your guys' upcoming episodes and just probably like heckle you about it. But I love it. And
is there anything you want to plug, Micah?
Oh yeah. I have a music criticism channel on TikTok and Instagram. That's what it's called. Called Duck Duck Critic. You can find me at Duck Duck Critic, and just reviewing music albums, and have a band called Prince Duck that you can stream our album that's came out this year anywhere that you listen to music. Spotify, Apple Music, or Deezer, or any of the other streaming platforms. It's on Deezer. We're not big on Deezer, but we are on there. But yeah, and catch me on Burn This Book when I show up, because and keep on listening.
Burn This Book is produced by us, Nicolle Corin and Eden Wen.
Music by myself, Nicolle, and performed by my dad, Frank.